followed by Phil, who will talk about his own work, and then by Tori's own work, and with an introduction by Robert Harris, whose idea this exhibition and this project is. At the end then we'll have a chance for questions and discussion, but because Judith has to unfortunately rush off to get to the airport, after Judith has spoken there'll be a chance for people to ask questions of Judith. So we'll start off with Robert.
Yes. Well, good morning. How wonderful to see so many people here. Thank you for coming. Well, it's a fabulous exhibition, I think. It speaks for itself, doesn't it? And this is a representative sample of some of the art that's being produced in Cornwall today. And I had the idea, I lived in Cornwall for 30 years, and I had the idea when I came to live here, because this area has such strong historic artistic links as well, that there's merit in getting people together. Also, I'm very anti-Brexit. Any opportunity to bring people together across the artists are. So I'm not going to say very much, just that really, I think the work is absolutely amazing, and I'm so grateful to these three artists for coming, and there's a lot of effort involved in this. If you saw the day that everything arrived, the whole gallery floor was full of crates, wooden boxes and all sorts, you'd be amazed at the work that then has to go through, which Steve and of course Steve supervise, and then suddenly it all comes together and you get this brilliant, brilliant exhibition. So it's really your opportunity to hear the artist and to ask some questions. Please do be as provoking as you like, because that's what they are.
You didn't tell us that.
Don't ask me too many searching questions, because I'm not the artist, and I might not be able to answer. So I'm Judith, I'm Matthew's widow. And I'm just going to say a few words about Matthew's art and Matthew. I'm used to writing a bit about his work, but not talking about it. But see how it goes. So Matthew was born in Cornwall. He was born in St Ives and has lived there most of his life. And when you come to his paintings with a fresh eye, you might find that you quite quickly begin to recognise that a painting can't be by anyone but him once you start to look at them and really get into that world that he's created. You start to see that perhaps the person behind these paintings has a powerful mind, really, and that he inhabits a place very carefully. And with a great sense of play. Yeah. At home, because we live in the far west of Cornwall, in a place with a lot of space. At home he would sort of build nests and caves for himself all over the place. And they were like his stations of the cross, really, that he would move between and do different sorts of work in. And when he returned to live in Cornwall in the mid-1980s to settle, he laid a line of white stones across the ground where he lived, marking the line of the sunrise at the summer solstice. And he built two tall scaffolding towers from where he could watch and photograph the sunrise every day as it came up. And that line of stones and the rusty towers are still there at home. And his interest stemmed mainly from the very singular experience of inhabiting a particular place, a new dwelling place that he'd made, in fact, and then creating a sort of unique new map of it, which I think in a way is what he's doing in most of his paintings. He's sort of creating this map of him in the world, in his place. And there was a little bit of mysticism thrown in there, but not much, and a real thirst for prehistory and astronomy in the mix. He's worked with an ambition and conviction as an artist since he was 37, and at first he made objects, 3D objects, often reworking his old joinery tools and cameras and typewriters. And then he really began to paint in, I suppose, about 1998, really just painting mainly. And he's held annual solo shows of his whole year's work since 1998. He was very prolific, produced a lot of work, very popular, and he pushed the boundaries of scale to producing since 2007, which was this first big painting here, Journey to the Stars. He's produced 5 22-foot paintings since then, but also very small, intimate oil paintings. And he's been making work as well in architectural glass since 2014. The latest of which is here, the 6th of which is here. And he planned this together with the team at the studios near Frankfurt, where it's fabricated, this type of architectural stained glass. But he never actually lived to see this one made, because he died in November last year after a really short illness, when cancer was diagnosed very late. He also last year did for the first time tapestry, which you might have seen at the back, which was called In the Tracks of the Yellow Dog. And it features, if you look at these 2 panels in glass, the left and the central one, the tapestry features the same image in a completely different medium. And he created that depicting really a personal journey into an afterlife, running from east to west. And it was his mother's journey, really, because she died in 2015. But of course now you can look at it and choose to think that it was his own journey into the afterlife. Really, for Matthew, I think painting or art was a kind of love. He painted like a hunter, kind of bringing home a beast with the greatest respect. But he also said that each painting was like you see here and on the tapestry. It's like a treasure ship that carries a person's, what's been sacred to a person in their life, the experience, the place, the culture, the Beaker people did and the Egyptians, where they would send. So he was really interested in that, and that's kind of what each painting was in a way. It was, this is it, this is what's sacred to me, to him. So Matthew's work is anything but a random assembly of abstract marks, although we can just enjoy them like that, obviously. We can just look and get that joy out of them. But there's an awful lot going on in them, and a lot of symbolism. He didn't write a lot about his own work, although he did write a lot of poetry. But he did do a few, just in the last few years, of these kind of diagrams of paintings where he's kind of said, this is what's going on here. So I'm going to just try and just talk about this one a little bit. Is that, so, this one's called Holding the Very. And as you might expect, the very is was sort of about him and me, and you know. But then about a year ago, I heard him say, "Oh, that's about my dad." And that was just typical. You know, something would start off as one thing, and then it would shapeshift completely into something else, like a character in Greek myth, really, which he was also really interested in. So in this one, sorry, I broke my ankle last week, so it's difficult, but in the Bible, there's a lot of characters in Matthew's work from Bible stories, although he didn't have a faith as such. There's a lot of characters. So across here, I know that this is kind of about Salome, who danced for the head of John the Baptist. And so Salome is kind of lying across here. And there's a hammock coming down here. This might be all completely made up, I mean, I don't know. And then here, there's the head of John the Baptist on a platter. So that starts to give you some idea. There were always figures in his work. There's often the angel Gabriel, and there's a figure here and there's a figure here. These are the two kind of key figures in this painting. And these are their hands. So, and up at the top here is a place in Cornwall that was really precious to him, the Drevey Lighthouse. He's done lots and lots of paintings of the Drevey. And there's a lovely beam of light coming from the lighthouse across the top. And then at the top here, strangely, this is a sign from Perranporth Airfield that he always used to use, which is an airfield in Long Cornwall, where he used to go with his father, Peter Lanyon, who you might know. Peter Lanyon died after a gliding accident in 1964. And just before he died that summer, Matthew spent time with his father at the airport, gliding and hanging around with the men. And you often see that in his paintings, because his father was very important to him. You know, Matthew was only 13 when he died, and those of you who've had a similar experience will know it just stays with you. And he loved his father's work. And here there's supposed to be a midwife bending, and Gwithian and a Lamp Church up here too, somewhere. And Matthew's actually buried now at the Lamp Church as is his father. And these are the red lights on the mast over Carn Marth, near Redruth, where there was quarry mining. These are the lights on the mast there. They occur quite a lot in his work. And this is St. Michael's Mount. I don't know if you've ever been to Mounts Bay in Cornwall, but there's a lovely island with a sort of castle on top, and there's one in Brittany as well. And so you often see this in Michael's work as well. And of course, he always has the main central sea in the middle, very often has the main central sea in the middle of the painting. And then lots of things going on around the outside, places all around the outside. And here we've got, you certainly see it in the tapestry, the process of the suns or the days being taken around the edge of the painting to the west. So it's like life to death, really. And here is being measured, and this is the exact shape of the living hill that you see from home. So that's the skyline on the 21st of June, sunrise. That's where the sun will lie in relation to Trencroft, the hill. And then there's another one here, sunrise over Godolphin, which is a really ancient house in Cornwall, Godolphin House. And in fact, Matthew comes from a kind of aristocratic family, really, and they used to have, his uncle used to live at Godolphin House, and he would spend Christmases there. So that's always there, Godolphin Hill. And then here, he's put on his drawing, this is the firm ground of the sea. So it's like, this is all turbulence, really, and then there's this firm ground. And this is the head of the girl. So you've got the girl and the angel Gabriel. I think the angel Gabriel is the one on the inside here, and this is the head of the girl, Chore, from the Greek. So that's just a sort of what he's put on here. So in all the paintings, really, you know, the more you look, the more there is kind of going on. And he was really self-taught, and he read a great deal. And I suppose his visual language is just so much his own, but it calls up ancient art, which he became increasingly interested in, and which I'm sure you'll talk about more today. Particularly that found like across the whole western seaboard of Cornwall and here in Brittany and Scotland in passage graves and caves. And so the painting out in the corridor, Skibbereen, he did because he was becoming so interested in all that. And I think what really interested him was that they had, those images had travelled into present day culture and are still alive and have meaning for us, and that all we really know is they're related to cosmology and they held meaning both in the East and the West. And he has them in his work all over the place, really. And he was so looking forward to coming here to this exhibition and us spending time and exploring when more paintings would have come along, I'm sure. So basically, you've got, when you look at it, you can just feel that fun, because he was just one of the most, he was just so funny, isn't he? And quite extraordinary, really. And he had such a strong feeling for the earth and creatures on the earth. And he just kind of loathed unfettered capitalism. But he loved engineering and science, you know, so it's not like he was just growing vegetables. He absolutely, you'll find everywhere, there are roads in lots of his work, there are cranes, you know, all of that kind of thing. Just loved all that. There are shipwrecks everywhere, of course, and lakes and fishing wars, particularly, and Cornish poverty, and personal loss and grief everywhere in his work as well. His first partner died in 2007, and his father, of course, when he was 13. And in the main, he was, and this painting here was done actually straight after his first partner died. So that was 2007, and I think that's really important for that painting. very, very happy and joyful and funny and extraordinary, and he rejoiced in art and in life. And I hope you enjoy the exhibition.
Anybody have any questions for Judith? Yes.
Did he find it easy to take up painting?
To take it up.
When he started painting, and what was, I'm interested in how confident he was about his work.
Yeah. I first met him when I was only 20, and he was always drawing and doing bits, but I think he felt the great pressure you sometimes feel in a family where there's a really famous artist, and there were 5 other brothers and sisters, and everybody was keen to do some art of some sort, and I think he felt that he couldn't step into that phase. And then one day he just did, I think there's a story on his website about how he's got one son, and he was drawing with his son on the kitchen table like they did every day, and he heard a car coming down the lane, and of course it was his mother coming down the lane in the car, and immediately put everything away. All the drawings and painting, and then he thought, oh, why am I doing that? I'm 38 or whatever. And that was the moment when I thought, I can't go on like this. And then he just started to do it, and just did it full time.
Judy, I obviously knew both you, and Matthew was an amazing mystery, but it wasn't a mystery that was impossible to be in touch with, because he was an incredibly lovely man, and you kept on thinking, I wish I could match this richness. I think there's a tremendous richness in this work, and it really doesn't matter the symbols, but if you've got some clues, it works anyhow. And I think that was the most beautiful description of it, and a celebration of his work. And it was scary, wasn't it? Scary and hairy.
So we have to get Judith.
So I have to go now. Right, sorry.
I hope this will be illuminating in some way. I've got a couple of things to say before I start, which might seem like I'm about to let myself off the hook a bit, which maybe I am. By the way, my work is the wood and metal constructions on the wall. We as artists these days are not only expected to make the work, but to be, we're increasingly prevailed upon to be super articulate in words about it. And I've listened to any number of artists' talks about what they do. Well, in the end, I have to say I'm often wary about the conclusions that you kind of come to after you've heard someone talk about their work. It's often better, I think, when someone else talks about it. They've got better insights into what they do. Because when you're working, there's so much going on in your head that gets condensed into the pieces, the thing that's in front of you, that you're kind of balancing all kinds of things. And simple, clear destinations, proposals get kind of submerged in all kinds of interesting ways. I've got a quote from the writer, a very recent quote from the writer, Annie Federation, which I found really quite a relief when I saw it. He says, if the artist thinks they know what they are doing, then it's probably not art. Anyway, I'll try and elucidate my process to you and what motivates my work. All of the work here, by the way, if I start slow down a bit.
I'll show you.
Okay. All of the work here belongs to one particular approach within the range of stuff that I do. And they largely originate in reactions, in my reactions to encounters with the landscape. But they are also driven by issues and attitudes, philosophical ideas about the world around us, about maybe personal opposition to the traditional dualism of Western thinking, which creates a divide between ourselves and nature. There are aspects of the way in which we relate to the world around about us which cause me concern, but at the same time, overriding that in these works, or maybe not overriding, but certainly meshed in with that, there's a desire to celebrate nature in some way. What are these encounters with nature? What do I mean by encounters with the landscape? These are, generally speaking, I walk the landscape a lot, and I look for places where the landscape has a kind of age of the world quality, where the raw bones of the landscape are more visible, where the structure of the landscape is more visible, where it has a kind of emotional impact, a visceral quality to it. But within that, what do I select to work with? It's a bit of a... This is one of those moments where I can't actually say, because exactly this, that, and the other. It's kind of instinctive, but it's to do with either perceiving structures within the landscape. And by structure, I often mean geometry. And I work with the landscape, but I also have, like Matthew, a fascination for engineering, architecture, mathematics. Increasingly, cosmologists and physicists have come to the conclusion that the laws of nature and the laws of mathematics are one and the same. And when I came across that, I felt like it kind of reinforced what I felt about the way in which some of the motivations for my So I go to the landscape, but I draw it. I draw it extensively. And I don't really rely on memory. So I draw it in great detail when I go to the landscape and I bring that back and I start to process it. And that processing, I like to think of it in terms of a kind of personal geology, because it's driven by some of those ideas I just mentioned about maybe an anxiety about our relationship with the natural world, and trying to kind of bring that out. Or maybe I have another set of structures which I'd like to amalgamate into this piece of work. And inevitably that brings about significant changes to what I drew in the landscape. So there's a kind of, I like to think of it as a kind of geological process, transformations, distortions, metamorphic actions taking place. I like to try to bring it all to a point where those physical qualities in that original encounter with the landscape, they come to a point in the development where they can be expressed in a more abstract way, in a language which stands alone, if you like. There's no attempt in these works to depict reality. There's no real depiction. They are their own territory. There's allusion to landscape. There's a lot of organic shapes, organic forms, and certain kinds of flow in it. And I was speaking to a few people last night who let me know what they thought they were seeing there. And that's okay, I'm absolutely totally easy about what people perceive in the finished works. There's another reason why I think artist talks can be a bit dodgy, because what I say or what the artist says can become a kind of straitjacket for your interpretation, and I don't really like it. I think It's important that the observer finds their own way through it and comes out with their own conclusions, even if it's totally different from what I might have anticipated. That's absolutely fine. But if I can just lob in another quote from a chap called Professor Bradley in a lecture at Oxford University. He says, the nature of a work of art is to be not a part, nor yet a copy of the real world, but a world in itself, independent, complete and autonomous. Of course, he was describing what came to be modernism, which is quite an ancient action. But though I wouldn't describe my works as modernist, certainly I think that quality of them standing alone is quite critical. So it's my purpose is to make a piece of work which is its own entity, without direct reference to things outside itself. Yet, the principles of encountering the landscape I try to keep in there. The diffuse point of view, it's not a single viewpoint, the unframed edge, and the experience of the physical space of the landscape. The physical space of the landscape is translated into an experience of the space of the wall, where the thing comes out. There is a degree of three-dimensionality and a degree of encounter with the piece of work. But the function of the works is presence, not illusion. They are of nature. This is a key kind of thing for me. Of nature rather than from nature. They originally are from nature. I endeavour to give them a sense of being of nature, of the kind of thing that nature is in some way. So they allude to and celebrate the dynamic of the natural world rather than depicting it. There is assemblage in the works, which you may see here and there. In this particular series of works, the assemblage is relatively small, a relatively small amount. In other kinds of works that I do, there's considerably more. These are often kind of scrapyard sources, machine pieces and the like. I'm interested in them for their history. They allude to a different kind of source, a different kind of history, a different kind of life altogether. Sometimes they are manipulated and integrated in such a way that they become totally part of the piece. In other cases, they work as contrasts, in which case they may achieve a certain talismanic quality. And like they become an odd kind of touchstone within the rest of it. I don't think there's a great deal more I want to say. No.
Thank you, Phil, for that insight into your thinking. We'll now go over to Tony and then we'll take questions from both.
Thank you. Just amazing just now listening and it was a disaster listening because I started to think, and one of the things that I discovered slowly over my time is that the more I think, the worse the work is. And you can say I'm basically unprepared, and I'm hoping that something will form now in 10 minutes. I'm usually could do about 10 hours, but it's a struggle. I've tried to think about linking why there is any relationship between what I do and Cornwall and where we are now. And I started off, it's taken me years to make connections. I think it's as in normal life. We find out who we are by the accidents and by chance conjunctions. I rationalised I could make a living at one point trying to escape from teaching, by making pots. And, you know, I really thought the active discipline of throwing on the wheel would be okay. At least I could sell them, possibly. But I know that the person I am inside was not gradually discovered that, you know, it was incredibly frustrating, and I was, you know, the thing went round and round and round, and it all stayed in the same, and sort of, you know. I had a friend who was a star of a potter called Patrick Sargent, and he threw pots on the wheel. He was very macho, very Viking, fantastic. Pull it up, you know, and at the end, and he would throw 1,300 in 4 or 5 weeks easily, and fire a massive great kiln. And I mean, I was overwhelmed. But one of the things that stuck in my experience of him, that at the end of it, when he threw it, he then knock it off centre, because that was somehow to link it with the Japanese Eastern aesthetic that, you know, there's, I don't want to go on about that too much, but the Eastern vision of beauty is related to the asymmetry of life, not the formalised structuring that the Greek Romanos sort of mentality where we have, you know, we balance everything beautifully. They would rather see a tree blown in the wind and say there was a naturalness with brackets arbitrariness. And I couldn't, I knew that wasn't right. It didn't feel right, it felt uncomfortable, off-centred. But I knew that somewhere in amongst it that I wanted to make bowls. I don't know why I wanted to make bowls. I mean, the key to this is, you know, if you know what you want to make, you just do it. If you don't know what you want to make, you've got a problem, because it's vast, and the inspiration and the possibilities and ideas and being clever, and every book you've ever seen and every magazine or every television programme is hitting you, and you're going, oh, and how to find yourself in that mess, to me is becoming oneself. And if you can articulate becoming oneself by expressing that within the medium, if you're going to be an artist, I mean, brackets artist, I think you do it in the garden, I think you do it sewing, I think you do it singing animals, it doesn't matter what you do. But it so happened to be over this thing about clay, and I don't really like clay very much. It's a pain. It hurts like mad. You're more likely to suffer with it. It doesn't do what you want it to do. But I was in Cornwall, and I suppose over time I've been looking at how rock pool, actually it's the rock pools in the end that became the focus. I've been looking at water flows we were in Cumbria, and the streams were coming down, and I thought, oh yes, beautiful shapes, you know. And I'm very worried about beautiful shapes as well, because again, you can be trapped in the concept of what's beautiful. I'm more interested in what's actually real, but I've only say that because I've been suffering it or trying it for 50, 60 years, somehow or other. And I remember sitting on the beach, and I wanted to get the impression it wasn't me being clever. I mean, I'm worried about being clever. Most of the knowledge I have comes from letting go of that, and I find that the biggest struggle. And I come up eventually, and I began to discover my intuitive risk was about the only source I could use. And so sitting on a beach, the sea was crashing as it does here and in Cornwall, and I know all the links about the form of the landscape here, the form of the lifestyle here is intimately linked with it. We are not yet insulated by going into the synthetic city. You've still got remnants of the life lived here is directly related to it. But that's all clever. It's nothing to do with me. I'm not interested in that. I happen to understand it somehow. But I sat on the beach and I thought, and I was thinking about round pots, round bowls, and I thought, you know, rock pool, and I did not copy rock pools. And the sea was, and I thought, and I don't know how it happened, but I started to sort of scooped the sand out just by dithering about. It wasn't even to start with. And I thought, okay, the sea, it's mostly coming in from the west. When it crashes, what happened? I mean, if the waves were smashing on the rocks over millennia, fundamentally from one direction, and they were rocking stones around in the bowl of the getting an indentation and gradually erode and work away. So in a quickened up space, I sort of, and I sound pretentious, but I became the wave, speeding the whole process, and we did begin to get these shapes that began to arrive inevitably. A bowl that had, and I thought, well, it has some integrity because it just keeps happening. So we'd been on holiday, Cathy and I, and we rushed back home and bought a ton of sand because we lived in Devon at the time, and it wasn't a convenient beach. And I spent a lot of time being the wave, which is very dangerous in Devon because it's very hippie-ish. But we sprayed it and patted it tight, and then I poured plaster in to cast that shape. And it seemed as though it obviously wasn't a lift of a. I began to realise it wasn't a lift of a. I've copied a rock pool, but it began to have its own dynamic. It had its own life because it was a reflection of actually force. The forces that somehow are like a metaphor for the shapes that we get in the landscape. And turning that plaster over, you can lay a slab of clay over it, turn it up, and you've got a bowl, an asymmetrical bowl. And then, because the way the waves comes in, you get it hitting hard at one point, so you get a sharp edge. That's how you get this asymmetrical, lovely sort of alternative that somehow has an integrity rather than just cleverly making structures. And I then started to coil on top, and follow the implied line of the wall. So if you've got part of the mould from the bowl mould or whatever, and it's no longer a bowl now. It took me a long time to understand that I wasn't making bowls and I'm not a potter. I was somehow exploring some three-dimensional form that possibly was sculpture. I didn't care at that stage. So, I coiled round and round. And so the angle that we would go was implied by the line that we created in the scoop shaping. And so the first bowls I made were nearly a metre across. And then came the problem with the edge. And we thought, well, do I just stop? Level? Well, that's not right. Because obviously the inevitability of a wave and any flow, we don't have level finishes to the cliff. Again, and I try to think of a way of finishing that. So there's a method of pulling handles when you're making pots, as in domestic ware. And you take a slug of clay, wet your hands, and you gradually pull it. It's like a sausage when it gets more and more extended. And I had done that, and I thought, if I put a big slug around the rim of the pot, and then if I wet my hand and then sort of again try to use the motion around the form as though it was a flow form, I ended up with uneven rims, and I also ended up with things that have an organic relationship with the ones that have been happening this way. So that's how I learned that I wasn't really interested in brackets in landscape, although I love it. That's, there's not a disconnect there, but that somehow I realised I was interested in form that seemed to echo, to be a metaphor for the powers that create the land, and then ultimately actually us. But so there's one example only. I would have liked to have one in the show here, but I've sold the ones I made. I was planning to make some, but there's one there that is not a good photograph because you can't see the real shape of it, but it's amazing. And then again, then it goes on to painting. Have I run out of time here? Because I've only started with this lot. So if I very quickly go to this, gradually, I was still throwing, and the same problem of how do you go off centre, how do you go away and make it, because I began to trust something was expressive. So I found throwing on the wheel too frustrating, and I wanted in the end to tell it. I realised, you know when you throw it, you're pulling up a spiral. And you know, the joke is it all goes wobbly and everybody laughs. But I thought, well, if it didn't, you could go somewhere wandering into space. So I started coiling spirals, actually. And the inevitability of a spiral is as you go around, it narrows. And very slowly, you know, and these have got elements of that. And I began to see that there were links as you came round, it was going to fall over. So you had to stand and stick there until you got the balance that way. And then I finally clocked. That was like a dancer. So in a way it's like balance. So, you know, to say, oh, I'm awfully interested in balance. It's rubbish. I mean, but it was actually an integral part of discovery. So they were dancing. And inevitably, as you came round the curve, you go in, you narrow in the spiral. And you suddenly start realising, gosh, that's Kathy's hip. You know, and so although they have an anthropomorphic quality, they are actually an expression of form manifest through process. And I end up following them, and again, it's so arty. I agree with Phil about arty speak. But, you know, you do develop a relationship, and the clay does speak to you in the sense that it forces its requirement onto you. And if you can sort of live with it and are willing to see where it takes you, that's where you go. And so these are products of spiral growth that you may pick out connections. I think they are humanized in the sense that I think it's done out of a film. Judith was talking about love and act of love. I know Phil does this out of being human and celebrating. And so I think if they have a humanity, well, it's a blessing for all of us that we're human, I think. And then people will say to me, why do you, the one thing I get most of all is why do you paint them? And basically because it's great. And I discovered the joy, I hated drawing. You know, Phil draws and uses it, and fantastic. And I envy that skill, but I was bored silly with drawing. So I didn't discover this didn't happen until I was over 50, because actually none of the big things were ever made. I didn't start until I was 50. And Kathy had a form of breast cancer, and it had the impact. We didn't know she was going to be safe, and it's the first time I'd been confronted with any. I sounds incredibly facile, but I hadn't really been touched by the concept of death in that sense. And it was a possibility for 2 or 3 months. And crazily, for me, I just thought, well, why am I faffing about wearing a little bit of splits? I've used to clay, the thing will explode. And why am I worried about taking a brush? And you know, and I just learned that drawing in a sense was dip your brush in and see what happens when you caress the thing. I discovered caressing through a brush, you know, touching, and so and gestures. But the things that inspired me in terms of not being is that that's it's called a Larnax, and it's a Minoan bathtub for the very rich. But it was a really good bargain because you could also be buried in it afterwards. I suddenly realised that the stuff I love is the actual casual gesture of being able to load the brush and go, ooh, but you have to risk it because it looks splodgy and messy and gungy. But it also is a lovely experience when it suddenly works. So that's the painting, and we also found these little deers, which are copies of the proto-Greek, pre-Greek civilization bird. And I mean, how is that a bird? Only the essence of bird. There's not one reference I can see that is literal. But look at that lovely. Oh. And that gave me freedom, but it took me 50 years to get. make art because we want to share it. And a genuine, to be able to be articulate, which is hell on earth to achieve, for ourselves and in the work. But when we work in lonely places most of the time, because we're on our own, it's just lovely to share this. So thank you very much. I know that was yours.
Thank you. Anybody's got any questions for Phil, Tony, or Robert?
Question to Philip, you were talking about mathematics and science. I assume, is that fairly late? Is that fairly recent? Is that a fairly recent thing, or have had an interest in it for a long time?
You're so interested in mathematics and science. Is it recent or have you always been?
No, I was one of those weird kids at school who wanted to do physics, maths and art. It caused all kinds of headaches for the timetabling master, but I managed it. But I went off instead of. I didn't follow that up in a professional sense, but I went to art school after school. But I've always had a really strong interest in cosmology and physics, and still read about it. I'm actually halfway through a book on quantum gravity, which is serious.
Incredible.
There's an Irish physicist back in the 60s called John Stuart Bell, who did the mathematics to resolve the lifelong argument between Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein. And it basically paraphrased into reality is somehow dependent on how you observe it.
Yeah, well, I mean, reading this book is actually the early chapters clarify Einstein's theories, and I now half understand them.
And that's Tony, your question.
Robert!
Tony and I have known each other for a very long time. Is that right? Anyway,
Yes.
I'm, of course, because the whole exhibition was conceived about linking West Cork with Cornwall. We're telling the story of Cornwall today, we still have to tell the story of West Cork, which we will be doing, because West Cork is very important as an artistic centre of art, should we say. But what I'm interested to hear from Tony is, does he feel that his work is in any way inspired by the fact that Cornwall, when the artist came to St Ives, it was Bernard Leach, Japanese artist, that's right, who sort of rather started off that particular part of the artistic movement in Cornwall. Were you aware of that? Do you think in any way you had any sense that you were following in those footsteps?
I think it was a nightmare for me because it's part of the seduction of when I said that I was trying to throw pots and I wanted to have some authority of what was valued. And in fact, it's been having to reject that as being part. I don't see these as pots at all. In England, Britain, or whatever you call it, you know, it's so stupid that the Arts Council will affirm any of the pieces that I fill in on the top, because then they become sculpture. If I leave them open, it's the Craft Council of Great Britain that somehow. and there is a real problem in using ceramic because it has no status. It is craft, and I'm nothing against the concept. Craft is a craft, and that's fantastic. But you know, I don't have a place for these. They always cause problems because they don't fit a category. But yeah, actually, I mean, I'd like. There's a book I came across again. You know, it was a bit trendy, but it was if you meet a Buddha on the road, kill him. It's written by a guy called Cop. And I think that you have to kill your. Well, for me, you know, for me, almost breaking away and destroying their influences. It's not that you don't come back to respecting what they did, but for your own growth, you know, you're still tied in with them until you've stepped out, or you know. So actually, no. The important thing is these mysterious discovers, which are, I don't know, about how one trusts oneself and trusts one's value system. I mean, I don't know. It's just, but I use a lot more in, I find when I'm being clever, I don't do it. When I'm trusting myself and it appears to be intuitive, which is from another source, and here I am, I'm saying that this is what I did, there you are. Now, because we're all intelligent and we do use it, we can't go around just feeling things alone. We're a balance between thinking and feeling. I mean, I have a lot of knowledge and learning about stuff. And in the end, I just have to trust this, just in the way that everyone else in the end trusts their own, how they behave, and why they spend their money, and what they do. So the only thing I've discovered now, I mean, I'm 72, and I think I didn't really trust, I totally trust the work, and probably only in the last 3 or 4 years out of 25 years of the big ones and stuff before. I would stand by these, and you can say anything you want. You can insult me, you can love it, you can ask me anything, and I'm delighted to share it. It's just a wonderful
Tony, as they fit in so well here, would you consider leaving them?
Oh, absolutely. But how much? No, I don't know. Actually, if you seriously, if you want, I can't give you those because I've sold those too. But if you could find a place here that they would be, that, you're sort of saying that it's worthwhile enough to have, I would give it to you.
There's sensation.
Well, I don't want to be all over the top about it, but the most wonderful thing is the reception. What's the point of art? I mean, we're all seduced by ego tripping and so on, and everybody thinks it must be that. I know that Phil's work comes from a place of absolute integrity. It's nothing to do with let's be clever artists. Matthew astounded me. He's the most lovely, lovely. I mean, I was overwhelmed by him. I mean, he no way did he intend to be super clever and super connected. He was wonderful, but he had such a bleak humour. He was great fun. You wouldn't know what he was on about half the time, but he was very lovely. And he's a great boss in that sense, but not really, because there it is. It's sitting singing. And to me, that's what the real art is about. And if you're saying you think that's contained, that's a blessing. But it's got, I'm not giving it to you, you're a really nice guy, but you can flog it and make money. But if you've got an institution, and if there is, I can't see how you can use it here, because you've got to be, but yeah, it's an offer, definitely.
So the reason I asked that
sorry,
is because in trying to sort of put together this story of West Cork and the artists in West Cork, it's fascinating to see how the crafts and the arts were completely at one. When the people started arriving in West Cork in the late 1950s, early 1960s, which is when it all started happening, it was Krista Reichel, who was a ceramicist, and Laura Golden, who was a textile designer or artist, who really came and became the hub of the community, based around Ballydehob, in fact. I don't know whether you've seen. There's a board somewhere, I can't remember where it is, about the West Cork. Yes, it's just out there on the left, about the West Cork artists, which is just trying to briefly summarise the beginnings of it. They came into Ballydehob, they bought a property there because it was very cheap. They called it the Flower House, and they painted flowers all over the front of it, and it was a real landmark. That gathered together a hub of people, craftspeople, painters, printmakers, and they formed themselves into a guild called the Craftsmen's Guild. And that lasted for very many years and became very famous as an institution for sort of putting together, getting the artists together. And artists are pretty hopeless at getting themselves together, so but this is what they created. And I was fascinated to see how close the links were between what we might call art and what we might call craft. I mean, there is a distinction. I think it's what goes into it that counts. So that was a great answer, and I think this whole experience of getting people together here is very much something we can see echoes of coming back from that time, which is now quite a long time ago.
Well, we've got enough longevity to still have the sort of connection. I know it's a mystery for a lot of people I meet in their 20s and 30s who really it's from history. And that's difficult to deal with. But I'd like to just say again that I think it's true for us, and certainly, that to have the opportunity again to have a space, enough space with the light and so on. And I have absolutely fallen in love with Matthew's work in a way that I can never see it, because he painted these in a polytunnel, flat on a massive table, and I mean virtually could not get more than that far away. I mean, it's incredible. And really to then suddenly go whoop and stand back from it. They've been galleries that have been crunched and against the wall like that to see it. This is wonderful. And then I find the resonance between this one in particular and my pieces. I just feel there's a rightness, and that's something. And then I feel absolutely, once we were involved in the making of one of the triptych downstairs, and to see that in its space. So I think in terms of for us, and actually listening to you and listening as well to Judith, I mean, amazing.
Well, I think we're really privileged here to actually have this work all put together with these three artists. I think they sit so well.
Well, we are surprised to be delighted by that, truly. Yes.
The dynamic I think that we've created in these galleries is great. So, yeah, we've got to enjoy it.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Dave.
I would just like to say thank you for all other artists who do things I would love to do myself. I am an artist, but I'm grateful to them for doing things so much better than I would have done had I been doing that. Every word I can think of in that, and virtually every other artist I come across. The other thing I'd say is that there's a massive difference between the artistic experience doing it and the timeline thing, particularly with Phil's pieces. His experience of his work, the theatre from the point of starting, going through the project to the end product, from his perspective is entirely different from mine coming to see it. All I see is the footprint of the end product, and it's so good to be able to hear you talk about it and share, and actually know a little bit of the literacy of the art referred to. I mean, particularly Matthew's references to his forebears of Ben Nicholson and Paul Nash, even Americans and the Expressionists. But I mean, I see all the Cornwall, St Ives people, Terry Frost, who were all mates of these people. They touched me, but in a different place. Being for the auction, Terry Frost was my teacher. I just say thank you to them.
Well, thank you. It is a pleasure having you. I mean, really, it's an indulgence on our part. No rude comments. No sort of how on earth, why, or
Oh, you kidding?
you can't be serious.
I would say to Phil, for a start, I love the series you've got here. I can see that you're not only into the sculpture and you've got painting and texture work and all sorts into the pieces. This series here, is this a general sort of... Sorry, I mean, I haven't had a chance to Google you or look at your body of work. So is this the direction you've been in recently, or is this something like that? I work with all sorts of different...
It has a very long genesis, really. This set of work began in the late 80s. When I was doing a series of fairly large drawings landscape based. The process was similar. Go out to the landscape, draw, come back, start to process it, rework it, reinvent it, and try to find a new life within it. And they were largely pencil drawings at that time, but then I started collaging, and in a very short time, not just collaging, constructing on the surface. And then I just started, well, I had to paste the drawings onto a board and then started constructing with wood on the surface. That moved forward very quickly. And in those days, I didn't paint it. But you have to be kind of consistent with the wood then, because every bit of wood has its own colour, and it starts to have an impact on the way it works. So I need to take control of this. But then the control became a means of expression. So that took on life of its own. And the colours that I use and the way that I paint things. One thing I didn't say about my process, it's kind of, it's both calculated and intuitive. I'm always very doubtful about the word intuitive actually, because there's no such thing as a kind of a thoughtless thought. Really. There's always something organising it. There's always something behind it. So there's a calculation and there's slightly more fluid responses, let's say. So the colour thing is, I mean, they all start off white, in essence, except when they're gesso. Yeah. So, and then I start thinking about the colour, and I actually made colour studies first. In fact, the process is quite extensive. It goes to drawings, extensive drawings, maquettes, or collages, and in the collaging process, quite often there's a hint at the start of the colouring. The colouring, what kind of surfaces I might want to create. That's where that just comes in at that point. And it's
paper collage.
What?
Paper collage.
Paper collage using either surfaces that I make or surfaces that I get from places or different kinds of materials. So that leads me into that direction of what am I going to do with the surfaces, how am I going to paint them, what's the overall kind of feel going to be about it. But inevitably the colour also. Sometimes in some of these the colour is a kind of colour coding for the structures. It kind of it emphasises them, brings them out, defines them in some way. But in others, the piece just around the corner there's a recent departure with the use of colour, where the colour right across the structures that are made of wood and metal. It establishes a very different kind of space. And I'm still working with that really. Still coming every way. And that's interesting really. It's not settled in any way for me. It's not like saying, well, I did that. I've done a lot of much smaller pieces on that same principle as that one around the corner. They're kind of easier to control. It's quite difficult to control that sort of on a bigger piece. It kind of easily gets lost. It comes from kind of just a massive mosaic of lines and stuff. So, I mean, the most recent work is the triptych downstairs, which still uses this approach largely of colour coding, kind of colour coding the shapes, but if you look closely, it's not entirely the case. It's a bit unusual, isn't it? I mean, I don't know many other sculptors who make work like this. I mean, back to the constructive itself, is it painted reliefs, Frank Stella, but for different reasons and in different ways. And I'm interested in those guys, so I think that there's a rapport there. Not too strong.
So you don't do paintings as such? No.
No, it's not quite true. I thought a week of it. On a small scale, I do, yeah. But they're often, they're not entirely painted. They'll have things attached to the surface. There'll be some construction on the surface. Quite often found materials. From 2002 to 2010, I was living and working in Japan. and was able to access some fabulous handmade paper, which is really, really strong. So you can make holes in it and attach things with wire, and it doesn't fall off, it doesn't pull through. You can't pull it through. It's just so strong. And it will stand up on its own. So it's very quite thick. I use that. But the surface is quite well. There is a sense of painting on the surface, yeah. I find that that kind of area of territory between painting and sculpture really quite interesting. It's free of rules and largely free of history and largely free of constraints.
Can I say that I imagined I was a painter when I first started? When I was 16, I painted stuff that I now look at and think, wow, you were good. But not seen for, properly looked at them. But out of this that I was talking about, making the gestures and the painting, I think the only thing that holds us back totally is just a few more lifetimes. I would love to start now.
Say hold you back, sorry, Tony?
Hold us back, I need a few more lifetimes.
Yeah,
but there's a point now of exploration that was opened out unexpectedly through the path. And you think, wow, what a painter I could be if I had another lifetime to go to. And I'm sure, actually one of the things I find is happening, certainly in Britain again, is this idea that, I love the idea of people searching and going from, I weave things to, but somehow you're more likely to find a path, as following the line through where you're going. There's too much diversion and jumping about. There isn't enough time we were talking about this, weren't we, the other day. I know that Susie has been given a pottery wheel, and she's a musician, and there would be a total link, and I totally get it, and it's a very but how on earth we can learn to be all the things that we're asked to be in our society is just incredible.
I spent 20 years compromising art just to bring up a family and do
jobs
that I build.
Yeah.
And now at 50,
Don't.
started getting back into art full time because I don't have that responsibility.
No, well, I was making throwing balls because of the rationale I had to earn a living, as you do. I mean, what choice do you have? But I didn't make these. I had a broken marriage divorce. Kathy and I met together when I was 40. And actually, sheer serendipity, an aunt died, and we inherited within a few weeks of getting together. And, suddenly there were freedoms that I could never imagine. I don't think I could have carved my way to this. So this is a product of privilege. Don't think it's to do with some amazing talent. I was a market trader for 15 years, I think it was. It was a very good one. Loathed it, but I earned money because I had got the bag.
Really?
No. That is that's it. No more.
I'll just say one thing to finish off with, I think, and that is that I think the wonderful thing about this particular exhibition is the dynamic of the three different mediums, mediums. Because you've got Matthew, who's a master painter in the traditional style, nowadays, of course he turns into other things. And then you've got Philip, who's told us about how he can sort of sketch something out and begin to get ideas from that. Whereas Tony, I don't feel Tony ever sketches anything out. You can see Tony starts with material and makes it work. And I think that's great that you've got those three different. I may be wrong, but it doesn't matter.
Do you think it's wrong?
Dynamic.
Do you think it's wrong? Have I inspired you?
No, we won't go into it.
Have I inspired you?
We have to finish up. I just make my point. I think we have got a really good exhibition here because there's so much to see and so much to think about. This is the way it should be.
You are making that point. It's fantastic. I agree with you. I'm trying to say that, hearing what Phil was saying then, I've known from 5 years, 8 years.
And sheer physicality.
Yeah.
An inspiration itself.
But, listening, I mean, I haven't heard you talk in this way about your work. But, and again, as I said, so it's worked for us, so fantastic. Thank you, and... Well, I'll talk forever. No, I don't know which one. I will do if you think it's relevant. I mean,
I'll leave you my notes.
okay. Well, that's good. Yeah.
Tony's going to do a walk and talk because Tony was.
He's terrified now because he's used it all up. Oh God.
And Robert is going to be giving an illustrated talk next Saturday, same time, Saturday 10 and 12 o'clock. Called Chasing the Light.
Chasing the Light, so it's really concentrated on why we feel the artists are attracted to these western coasts, both in Cornwall and here, and sort of creating the link between them. So there is a very definite link, which has got to be explained.
Yeah.
Definitely. Great. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.